Well, hi everyone, this is the ARM deployments team. We are the ones working on ARM templates, Bicep, and everything under that vicinity. My name is Stephanie Yen. I'm a program manager on the team.
Are we doing intros?
Yeah, just really quickly.
I'm Alex, I'm PM on the team.
Hey everybody, I'm a PM on the team as well for Microsoft's developer division.
Hey, I'm Marcin. I'm a dev on the Azure deployments team.
Brian, John.
Brian, also a PM on the deployments team.
Hi, I'm John. I'm not on the deployments team. I'm in Fast Track for Azure team, joining the deployments team today.
Cool. Thanks, guys. One thing we wanted to do was thank all of you guys. This is just a snapshot of all of the things we've seen on Twitter. Thank you for being active on LinkedIn, being so supportive and active in GitHub as well. We really appreciate all of you guys. Can't even thank all of you guys individually, but here's just a snapshot of everyone we're really appreciative of and everyone else as well outside of this picture.
Okay, we did want to give you kind of like a picture into what's been going on. I think since the last time we spoke, we've done a few different like Bicep release calls or community calls as well. So not all of this may be totally new, but this is kind of everything since the last MVP conversation that we had. The first one is the template specs GA. So that went GA a few months ago. Not a ton of new features were added. It was more just us saying that the API is stable. There are some things coming soon, like built-in template specs. So if you're familiar with built-in blueprints, these will feel similar. Built-in policies, they'll feel similar. Bicep support, so that you can take your Bicep file and go straight to template spec without having to turn it into an ARM template in between. So just like we do in the deployments commands. And then there's this thing called UI definition or create UI definition you might be familiar with. We're going to support that in template specs as well. If you've been really paying attention, we actually introduced support for it at the API, but we don't have portal support for it yet, so you can't really use it yet. We fixed some paper cuts, so we're always trying to fix some paper cuts. Some long-standing issues. One is we don't evaluate empty loops anymore. So this was an awful runtime bug where even if the loop was not actually if that code in the loop was never going to get touched, we would still look at it and tell you that something was wrong with it, which was very frustrating. And we now groom subscription deployments just like we have for resource groups. Particularly with Bicep, we're seeing a lot more subscription scoped deployments. And so people are starting to hit this limit as well. So this is good that we're now grooming that. We released Bicep 0.4. We did a whole call on that, and maybe we can actually drop a link to that. But we introduced the Linter there, which has been great. Resource scaffolding, where we'll insert all the required properties on your behalf. We have the ability to retrieve a secret from a key vault in Bicep. So Mikolai, who's a new MVP, and I think is in this call, implemented that. And then just overall stability and quality. In between 0.4 and what will be 0.5, we've been shipping releases. Mikolai also finished these load text content and Lotus base 64 functions. Load text content in particular is already proving to be incredibly useful. And there's all sorts of cool use cases. We can inject a file into the ARM template on your behalf, so you don't need to stage the file anymore, is the main thing there. We have some improvements to doing the list functions. So previously you'd have to do list keys, list whatever, and then get the resource ID and the resource API version. We know all of that in Bicep, so you can just get it off of the function now, like it's a member function, which is really a convenience and reduces a whole class of errors. And now you can use modules with ARM templates, which is particularly good if you have customers or if you are transitioning in and you don't want to overhaul all of your ARM template code. You can do like a main.bicep and then reference JSON files, which is really, and you get all the IntelliSense, you get all the goodness that we provide. ARM TTK, so we're seeing a ton of ARM TTK usage. Usage has doubled. in the last 3 or 4 months, which is really great to see. We are in the process of making it Bicep compatible, which means kind of aligning the linter and the TTK, and there's something out there called the best practice analyzer to make sure essentially that whether you're a Bicep user or an ARM template user, anything that we can check, we check. So we're in the middle of kind of aligning those things, and there's kind of a renewed focus in the TTK of getting through the issue backlog, which has been starting to stack up, and making sure that the GitHub releases go smoothly. ARM TTK, sorry, is the testing toolkit. So it's effectively a linter. It's a static code analyzer that checks for best practices. Quick starts is another thing that just gets a ton of usage and activity. There are now over 1,000 samples, and the GitHub front end will not load over 1,000 items. So we had to reorganize the repo to kind of deal with this scale. So you'll notice some old links don't work anymore, and we've kind of reorganized by a few different classifications. So you can go and check that out. As part of that, we've improved the quality pretty tremendously. So the actual, we check all the templates that they are deployable. It used to be like 60% of the templates were deployable. That's about 90%. So just the overall quality is improved. And we now support Bicep examples in Quick Start. So if you want to submit a Bicep sample, we support that end to end. We can test it and validate it and so on. We're going to move all of the samples that many of you have contributed in the Bicep repo over to the Quick Start repo. So that work is in progress, and we're kind of finalizing that now. And I think that's everything. Do I control the slides, Stephanie, or are you still controlling them?
Yes, so we're on to Marcus's demo. So if you would like to share your screen, sorry, Alex.
No problem.
And I do not trust my bandwidth, so I'm going to shut my camera off. Okay, so I'm going to demo some of the latest and greatest features in Bicep. Can everybody see my screen all right? Yeah, okay. I'm going to fly through these, so feel free to follow up with any questions during our Q&A. So as Alex mentioned, in 0.4, we introduced the linter that will inspect your code as you're typing and catch a customizable set of authoring best practices. As you can see here, I have a bunch of yellow squigglies that indicate I have some linter rule violations. So I can kind of walk through this starting out at the top. I have a secure parameter called top secret password, and I have a hard-coded password in here. So the linter is complaining I shouldn't do this. That makes sense, right? I don't want to check in my passwords to source control and in my infrastructure as code. So I'm just going to clean that up with a quick fix. And the next one here, it says that the parameter is declared, but it's not used. So I'm going to clean that up as well by just removing it. And I'll work my way down here. And again, I have a variable that's also not used. So I'm going to delete that one as well. All right, so this one is saying I can remove unnecessary string interpolation. Maybe I'm new to Bicep, I don't really know what that means, but luckily we have a quick fix here that'll fix this up for me. So as you can see, it just removed that special interpolation syntax there. I can just simply reference the parameter name since I'm not doing anything special here. And moving down further, I have a linter violation here that says use string interpolation instead of the concat function. So again, I might not know what this means, so I can quick fix it. And I can see that cleans up syntax a little bit here. I don't need to use a special function. All right, good to go. So a new feature that was just merged this last week is the ability to right click and build a Bicep template. So I don't need to go to the command line and use the Azure CLI or the Bicep CLI. I can just do it straight from VS Code here. So I can run that build, and that's going to do the transpilation process and spit out an ARM template. If there's an existing ARM template here, that right-click build is going to look for this metadata. So if it's a handcrafted ARM template, it's going to throw an error and say, hey, I don't want to overwrite this file. I want to make sure you go and clean it up yourself. So that's kind of how that works. Moving on, 0.4, we announced the scaffolding, and that kind of happens after the equal sign. We're presented with this required properties option. And so that's going to look at the Swagger spec of the resource type, and it's going to tell me all of the required properties, so I don't need to guess, I don't need to go on docs. I can simply just insert all those properties here and then fill in the values. So that's pretty cool, but taking it a step further, I'm now presented with that option inside the properties body. So maybe I handcrafted this, I knew what I wanted for my resource type and the name and location, but now I have that option in more than just that top level. So pretty cool. And we also introduced a bunch of new snippets. So similarly, I can just start typing alert rule. That's the resource I'm created. And that's going to populate my template with not only the properties, but values that are going to work to just get this up and running quickly. That way I don't need to fill this out and handcraft it from scratch. So again, everything starting with an RES is a snippet, a whole bunch of resource types available here now today. You can go out and contribute to these snippets. There's a contribution guide. We've had a ton already submitted by the community, so really cool stuff. One just recently, I think it was a couple weeks ago, is just a simple resource group snippet. Pretty useful. Moving on. Here I have a storage account. And then I have a deployment script down here. So as part of this deployment script, I'm required to pass in a storage account name and a storage account key. So line 21 may look familiar. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's easy to get the ID and the API version wrong. So I'm going to comment this out. And instead, I can use this. So we've added a list method call on Azure Resource References. So that's this guy here. And then I know I want the first of two keys, and this way, so this portion right here, this way we know how to add the right ID and API version for you, so there's less chance of failure. This not only works for storage accounts, but any list function on any relevant resource type. All right, and last one here. Got to give credit to Justin Grote for this policy example, but we've added support for JSON literal string conversion. So on the left-hand side here, I have an Azure policy definition. It's just network interfaces should not have public IPs. I can now consume that in my Bicep template by throwing it into a variable and using this load text content. And that way I can populate all of my my resource properties using the values inside that JSON file. So as you can see, I have IntelliSense here, so I can reference all that good stuff. The ID, the name, the properties. That way I don't need to hard code these values or use some like messy multi-line string or something like that. So just to highlight again, sense, pretty cool. That's all I have for demos today. As I mentioned, if I flew through this too fast, feel free to bring it up during the Q&A session. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Marcus. Brian, would you like to share your screen? Great, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. It sounds like there's some sharing problems. So I'm going to talk about stacks and kind of where we are. I'm going to guess that probably one of the first things that people want to know is when can we have it? And I'm going to give you the same answer I gave you the last couple times, which is real soon now. The difference this time is we actually have code running in production. We had some final configuration deployed last night. So hopefully that will, kind of get us to where we're going to do some testing this week. And we can take that, we can, assuming we don't have everything perfect the first time, we'll go ahead and probably do another deployment. That can take a week or so. So maybe by end of the month, we should have something. So we're really excited about that part. What are you going to see actually in the private preview? So we're going to have CRUD available, and there's kind of two versions of that. One of them is detach, and the other one is purge. We talked about this kind of in the previous ones, but when you update or you delete a stack, you can tell the stack to detach the resources that are no longer used, which means they're just available in Azure and they're no longer managed by the stack. Or you can purge them, which will delete them from Azure. So that'll be available. We're going to have subscription and resource group scoped stacks. So not the deployments, but the stack itself. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the coming slides. Deny assignments locks, that's going to be a little bit later. So probably a couple weeks off of the private preview. And that's mainly just because we want to get something out and get people working with it. Locks are going to look a lot like they do for Blueprint assignments today. So that should be familiar. And then from a tooling perspective, there'll be PowerShell, CLI, and then Portal. And Portal will probably come online at the public preview. We haven't gotten a commitment on a date from that yet, but we know we need it by then. So a couple things that we want to get feedback on. One is the scoping of deployment. We'll talk about that, and the delete scenarios. I'm going to kind of run through that as part of the demo. So the way to think of this, so if I have a resource group, I can deploy a stack to that resource group. So the stack itself is a resource. Much like a deployment is a resource, but a stack is going to be a resource that you're going to interact with a little bit more. So that stack is going to kick off the deployment, and we'll also deploy a handful of resources or whatever you want it to deploy. I can also lock those resources. Now, in the case of this scenario, I can do this. The whole lock aspect of it doesn't make a lot of sense, because if I have access to the resources in the resource group, I also have access to the stack in the resource group, more than likely, and I can just delete or update that stack to remove the locks. So it works, but it's really more of a convenience feature at that point. Of like you think maybe a dev test or just I want to clean it up easily. That's where you could see a resource group scope stack coming along. Now there's another scenario we can say, hey, I've got one resource group, I'm going to put my stack in there, and I'm going to put the resources in another resource group. And that's actually something that we're going to discourage, or actually we're going to block that specific scenario. While it's technically possible to do it, we want you to think of the stack as kind of adhering to the same hierarchy that you see with scopes and resources and RBAC and policy. So think of it top down instead of side to side. So there also would be a scenario where I can go ahead and I can deploy my stack to resource group. And then you guys probably know I can take this nested deployment and I can go over here and deploy to another resource group. And you can do that, but those resources that are in that adjacent resource group won't be locked. They won't be part of the locking. And again, that's kind of maintain the hierarchy that you see in RBAC and ARM today. So it's possible to do, not going to have the full set of functionality. And this is kind of the thing that we want to get some feedback from you on. So if you see scenarios where this is really needed or this will really be practical, let us know and we can kind of investigate that. But now we're going to start with a little bit more restriction, make it look similar to how Blueprint assignments do today, and then see how that goes as we mature the resource. So the way that we'd like you to do it, think of those same scenarios as you got a subscription, you can deploy that subscription or that stack to that subscription. And then from there, I can do different resource groups. So I can have one for app, I can have one for networking, I can take all of those resources and I can lock them. That'll work just fine. And that's kind of how we want you to think about using the stacks in the hierarchy. Another way to think of the same scenario is if I want to take that and do two different stacks. So if those things actually have separate life cycles, so the app and the networking are updated independently of one another, which is likely common, put them into separate stacks. And so then you can manage and you can lock and you can control them kind of as their own entity. So just another way to kind of think about the life cycle and the management of the stack itself. So from there, I'm going to jump over to the delete scenario. So we talked a little bit about workflow in the last one. This is kind of drilling into a particular scenario around deleting or updating the stack itself. So when I want to delete a stack, we'll talk about that one. And this will come in public preview. And one of the reasons why it's going to come in public preview is because this part here is not going to be there in private preview. We're not going to have that right away. So this is once it's kind of fully implemented in public preview. But if I delete it, the first thing I'm going to go through is have to remove the locks. And if for some reason I can't remove a lock, which is this here, I need to keep that as a managed resource in the stack because only the stack can remove that lock. So we'll keep it in the managed resources. And so this is kind of working through a failure scenario. The next part of it, if I go here to purge, and I can't purge, I've got the same thing. For if I can't delete a resource, which happens if I need to delete geo-pairing or there's some other problem that's going to prevent me from removing a resource, then we will add it to an array property on the resource, which is failed. And then we're also going to add it to detached, and I'll show you that in an example about how that will look. And then all that is coming down to, in the end of it, if there's anything here that I want to go and retain the resource for. So something happened and that something was not correct. So I expected to purge it, I expected to clean everything out, and I couldn't do that. Whether that was a deployment or that was actually deleting the stack, I couldn't do it. We want to be able to communicate that back. So that means I need to come down here to the failed scenario and I need to say, hey, this thing failed. You wanted to do something, it didn't work. And now we need to actually be able to communicate that back. And so that's what that will do. So there's a case there where I'll end up with, I want to go delete a resource. I can't delete it. And I'm going to retain it. I'm going to retain some information on that resource so that you can identify what happened. So if we look at the resource itself, look over here, we'll start with the put. So this is going to look very similar to what you see on a deployment put. So I'm going to have the basics things that I need are basically location and template. Update behavior is also new to the stack. That's going to have a default, so it's optional. Well, I have to have a template that I want to deploy, and I'll have to have a place where I want to deploy it. And that's kind of the simple version of it. If I look at the full kind of capabilities of the stack, now I have the ability to put in locks. I can put in descriptions. You'll see that this is going to look just like it does for blueprint assignments, parameter values that come in, debug settings, all of that. One of the things that is going to be different here is deployment scope. And so this is how you do that separation of, I need to deploy the stack and the template to different scopes so that I can protect or I can enforce the integrity of the locks. And so the deployment scope property will tell you where the template is going to be deployed at. And so that's kind of what the full version of that would look like. So from there, I'm going to jump down to snapshot, just for short on time. And this is what the snapshot will look like. So the get on the stack and the get on the snapshot will look very similar. In fact, the latest snapshot and the stack itself, the resource bodies will look very similar. There's very few differences between those two. The main thing that's part of the stack is this set of managed resources. So if I want to play through this scenario, say I wanted to do a subsequent deployment of my stack, I was going to deploy it in purge mode, which means I want to clean up the resources that are no longer part of the stack. For whatever reason that failed. So what I'm likely to see in that case is I will see managed resources because those are resources that were now added to the stack as the deployment, parts of the deployment succeeded. I could also see managed resources that I wasn't able to remove. So in one case, and we talked about the purge, I wasn't able to purge it. So I was able to remove the lock from the resource, but I wasn't able to delete the resource. So I'm going to detach it from the stack, and this array is telling you that that resource is no longer managed by the stack. You're on your own at that point. And then that same resource will be here in failed resources. And what that will do is tell you exactly why it couldn't be deleted or whatever error or whatever failure might have happened there, you'll see that there as well. So you can see these are the resources I need to go deal with and detach if that wasn't the intent. And then these are the errors that I found if I need to kind of debug and figure out what I need to do from that. That's kind of the way that will flow through. So again, keep in mind as we go through this, so this is private preview. So this is where we want to get some feedback from you all on, does this make sense? This workflow and this, the shape of this resource as we have it, is that what you would expect? You want to see something else? Is it going to be easy to work with programmatically? Things like that, and start to give us that feedback so that we can lock it down as soon as possible and kind of go on to the public review. So that's it from the stack side. John, do you want to take the slide or do you want me to keep going?
If you can keep sharing, Brian, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, I work for one of the customer-facing parts of Microsoft, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I know that the ARM team has noticed as well, is that over the last few years, a lot of customers have found it hard to get started with infrastructure as code on Azure, especially with the JSON template language. They might have started down the path of building some ARM templates, and then if they might have persevered for a while, but they probably got stuck at some point, and then their templates got stale and things got difficult. But our view really is that Bicep is such a big improvement to infrastructure as code on Azure that we think it's a really great time to help customers learn about how to do it well. And by that I mean not just doing the kind of understanding the language, but also understanding best practices, understanding how to automate everything and through a pipeline and so forth. So over the last few months, there's been an awesome team of people from around Microsoft putting together a lot of content for Microsoft Learn about Bicep and infrastructure as code using Bicep. So we're basically building out this complete course which includes everything up to pipeline content for both GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines. We're going to be building 4 Microsoft Learn learning paths, which cover everything from, like I said, the basic kind of core Bicep features through to how they can be applied to pipelines. Brian, if you can press enter, please. So the goal is to help to explain a lot of the concepts that aren't always obvious. So things like child and extension resources and scopes and deployment scripts and template specs and other things that customers might not necessarily have a lot of experience with before this. And really what we want to do ultimately is help customers to be successful with Bicep and with infrastructure as code on Azure. There's likely to be around 30 separate learning modules across these 4 learning paths. So it's going to be a very comprehensive course that we really hope will give a lot of value to customers. So the first 10 modules, or actually 12 modules, are available now. And we publish new modules regularly. So we're publishing them as soon as they're ready. And we've actually got one coming probably in the next few days and then more in the next couple of weeks. The first learning path, the one in green on the left there, is already published. Although we will be adding an extra module to that once some of the new Bicep modules features are available. And then the second learning path we're aiming to publish around the end of August, and then the pipelines learning paths hopefully by the end of the year. So really, Brian, if you could press enter again. So what I'd really like to ask your help with is to take a look at the content. So this aka.ms/learn Bicep takes you to that first learning path, and as we publish more, they'll all be linked together there. And also share it with any customers or any colleagues or anybody else that you think might benefit from understanding infrastructure as code. And also please provide some feedback as well. If you think there's anything that's missing out of this this set of content that we're preparing, I'd love to hear any customer pain points or issues that you think might be an opportunity to add some additional content for, as well as any feedback on the content that's there. That's it for me. I'll hand over to Alex.
Thanks. Quickly wanted to touch on the Bicep plans. We talked about this a little bit in the last community call and the 0.4 launch call. As with most things, we're kind of constantly tweaking these releases. The main thing for 0.5 is this concept of a module registry. So being able to create private registries within an organization, or even other public registries besides the one that we're going to stand up. So if your org wants to create modules to provide to the whole community, you can do that with the module registry. So it's really about just increasing the ability to share code, share good Bicep code with everybody. And Marcin's going to go through all that in great detail in a second. We have some cool new features like go-to-def for module sources and property references and things like that. I was just playing with that last night. It's like really awesome. So it just makes navigating code really nice. Right-click build, Marcus showed, and then we're continuing to improve the visualizer. So we have nice fancy icons now and themes, so that looks good. 1.0, really with 1.0, the main thing we're trying to do is solidify what's out there, have a stricter breaking change policy, so that, you know, if we're going to do breaking changes, we'll have a formal method of sharing that out. It'll have to be like a major version change to ship a breaking change, that sort of thing that we're used to in other languages and PowerShell and CLI and that sort of thing. We want to separate type updates from core Bicep updates. That just means we can ship new versions of resource providers and validate them without having to install a new Bicep version. And that'll also ensure that any Bicep updates or type updates will be backwards compatible with previous versions and that sort of thing. We've talked about extensibility for Bicep, basically to start being able to deploy AAD or Microsoft Graph resources, as well as Kubernetes resources. And we'll add more as the scenarios come up. We're going to have a preview of that for 1.0. The idea there is that anything where we kind of have baked in Azureisms, quote unquote, where we think we have made something generic, but it's not, the extensibility preview will flush out those things. And if we need to ship breaking changes and stuff, we'll do that before 1.0. And then there's this GitHub issue out there that Anthony wrote up describing the ability to pass resources between modules. I think we're going to be shocked at how much things improve when we're able to do that. So really excited for that to get out sometime before the end of the year.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the Bicep Registry. If I were to give a definition for the Bicep Registry, it's really just a mechanism to share Bicep content, publish it on basically on a registry that's external to your machine, and then later on consume it in other Bicep, consume them from the registry as well. So in 0.5, as Alex mentioned earlier, like we're going to allow you to publish modules to a registry and then of course consume them as well and share your modules with other people within your organization or even publicly. And in the future, we will expand what the registry supports to cover pulling in custom linter rules, custom analyzers, types when we decouple them from the core Bicep, as well as potentially extensions that pull in support for non-ARM resource types. And we, at the beginning, when we set out to design the registry, we did not want to build a new package manager, and we also did not want to invent a new storage technology for Bicep artifacts. So we try to basically look at what's out there and kind of try to reuse an existing solution that we have, that was there and available. We evaluated a number of options. If you paid attention to our GitHub issues, a lot of that, the evaluations and comparisons have been documented through GitHub issues. I will talk about the rationale for why we are choosing what's called OCI Artifacts as the underlying technology on the next slide. But for now, I'll just say that OCI stands for Open Container Initiative. It's the spec that covers container images, and was later expanded to cover basically arbitrary content that isn't container images. And I'm going to refer to that as OCI Artifacts. And we're going to choose that as our underlying technology. Regardless of that, the user experience, or at least we're trying to make sure that the user experience is as simple as possible. So if you need to publish a module to a registry, all you really have to do is get your module checked in somewhere and then or basically get your module ready and then just run the Bicep push command to compile it, to parse it, validate it, compile it, produce the JSON, and then push it to the configured registry that you'll pass through the command line. Be as simple as that. If you have existing modules that have references to, or you have existing Bicep modules that have references to other modules in the registry, you will have a new command called Bicep Restore that will parse the Bicep modules, collect all of the external module references, and pull them from whichever registries down to your local file system and cache them. And Bicep Build will run the Bicep Restore process behind the scenes by default. There are some cases where you'll need to separate it out, basically run the restore first, maybe bake the content that gets pulled into an image somewhere or whatever, and then runs Bicep Build separately. That'll be supported as well. And you'll be able to opt out of the restore process from Bicep in the Bicep Build command, as basically it'll be an additional switch there. This is very similar to how NPM works or how .NET Restore, .NET Build works as well. So if you're familiar with those ecosystems, it'll feel familiar here as well. If you're authoring your Bicep file in VS Code and you type in a reference to an external module, the language server will actually run the Bicep Restore in the background as you're typing. So the moment you type in a valid or syntactically valid reference to an external module, we'll try to pull it in from the registry to the local file system, cache it, and then the language server will be able to use the newly obtained type information to give you the completions and the type checking that you would expect with just any other local module today. So it'll be as simple as that. And as Alex mentioned, we will be able to create a private registry. Since we're using OCI Artifacts, this will be as simple as just creating an Azure Container Registry or an ACR in one of your Azure subscriptions and setting up RBAC to grant whichever users or groups permissions to pull or push artifacts as needed in your organization. And then if you already have an existing ACR set up, then it's great. You can just use it as is. No changes are really necessary. So if you're using containers today and you have registry set up, it's just you're actually good to go. Once your RBAC is figured out and if you have the permissions to push, all it's needed to publish a module to the registry is just to run the bicep push command, and the module will land in the ACR. We will have an official public registry, and that will take a form of a public GitHub repo, where both the Azure teams and the open source community will be able to submit pull requests, which will then be validated by CI jobs. We'll go through a review process, just like what happens with Quick Start or the Bicep repo itself. And if that's signed off, they'll be pushed to what's called a Microsoft Container Registries, where basically all Microsoft branded container images and OCI artifacts are published today. And it's actually searchable through Docker Hub as well. That will be probably the easiest way to publish a module for everybody to consume, but we will not block you from setting up your own public registry. The process is not something that we really have to. There's nothing we have to do to enable it. It's just an existing process that you could reuse from container images. You could set up your own ACR to serve as a public registry, and then just sign up and hook it up to Docker Hub and have it work that way. So we will not get in the way of that process. That process if that's what you want to do. Are there any questions in the chat that we should take right now? Anything pressing? Alex, have you seen anything?
I think people are wondering why we didn't pick this, that, or the other thing. So I would get to your next slide.
So let's talk about that. Yeah, because that is the exactly why we have the next slide. So why did we choose OCI Artifacts? We looked at a number of options. In addition to that, we looked at Git-based approaches, we looked at a NuGet-based approach, and of course we looked at our winner, the OCI Artifacts. With Git, the problem was that Git isn't really suitable for binary content. Now, modules themselves, either in source or compiled JSON form, are text files, so it actually would have been fine for modules themselves. But for content, Bicep content like custom analyzers or custom rules, which are really just .NET assemblies, it was not forcing the users to put them in Git would not be a good experience. Yes, there are workarounds. You can make binary files work in Git, but it's pretty much an anti-pattern. On top of that, with modules themselves, we have an interesting challenge when it comes to linter settings. When you have a When someone builds a module and publishes it to the registry, the consumer of the module shouldn't care what linter settings were used to build that module. Because you could have situations where the producer of the module just uses very relaxed linter settings. And if you're consuming it and you're running things in a very strict mode where everything's an error, and we reference the module by using the source, we will end up recompiling and rerunning the analyzer on the linter on it, which could mean that a module that is perfectly valid actually fails to compile because of the differences in linter settings. So in order to decouple that, we have to reference published modules via JSON instead. Basically, reference them through our intermediate language, which is JSON. That means that if you store that in a Git repo, you would have to commingle basically the source file and what is the build artifact, the JSON, in the same repo, and then ensure that they stay in sync, which kind of leads to very unnatural workflows. It can be made to work with some creative CI jobs or manually ensuring that you keep things in sync, but it's not a great experience. So both of these things were kind of blockers for us to use Git directly.
And sorry, I just wanted to, sorry for jumping in, Marcin. I just wanted to add that notion of using the quote unquote IL is there, it's analogous to in the NuGet worlds, you're not shipping C# code, you're shipping DLLs. In TypeScript, you're not shipping the actual TypeScript code, you're actually shipping the underlying JavaScript code. So there's precedence for this sort of thing because they deal with a similar type of problem.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Alex. Yeah. It's a good analogy for sure. And then with NuGet, what was interesting is that NuGet is kind of built to be a build time dependency, which to kind of use it effectively, you really have to have a split in your pipelines. You need to have a build step and a deploy step. And then if you build, the build step would do the NuGet restore, you would produce some build artifacts that get published somewhere, and then you deploy the deploy step would pull in those published build artifacts and deploy them to wherever they need to be deployed. NuGet itself doesn't really publish SLAs, at least on the public registry. So if there's any kind of unreliability or any kind of issues with resiliency during deployment, you would be impacted by it. And we found that a lot of your deployments would just fail because we wouldn't be able to pull in the packages from the registry. And a lot of our Bicep users are actually using just one deploy step to compile the Bicep files and deploy it right away. So that didn't feel like a good fit to us. And on top of that, there was a bit of a branding issue where NuGet is really focused on .NET content. Like if you look at the packages in that package repository, like almost everything is related to .NET in some way, and almost all of the user experience is really .NET centric. So we felt that that NuGet would be a very jarring experience for Bicep users to look basically to use to find Bicep related content there, which left OCI as basically the remaining option for us. Because it is an extension of the container image infrastructure that's been used for years now, it was designed from the ground up to be a dependency that you can rely on at deploy time. A lot of people build and deploy container images in one step. Bicep's not going to be any different, so that fit very well. It also puts you in the private registry side. If you set up your own ACR, you actually decide which region the Bicep content lives by setting the location property of your ACR correctly. All of the artifacts in there, including your container images and Bicep modules, live basically in that region. And you can set up your own replications fairly easily to replicate content to other regions, or even to registries in other regions, or within even the same region. And that allows you to match the topology, like the topology of your registry basically can match the topology of your app, which makes you resilient to any kind of outages in other regions interfering with your deployments. And we felt like that was a good positive thing to have when you're basically taking a deploy time dependency on something. And OCI artifacts are actually simpler to set up in restricted and private networks if you need to operate that way. With NuGet and Git, you would have to spin up VMs, put either GitHub Enterprise server on it or a NuGet server, and then set up the networking and then maintain all of that, ensure it's patched. And with an ACR, it's really just an Azure resource which you can then plug in, like hook up to a private network using the normal Azure networking primitives. So pretty much for all these reasons, we felt that OCI artifacts were just the best fit for Bicep going forward, although we're definitely interested in feedback and reactions to our decision from all of you on this call.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can take a few seconds. If anybody has any concerns with this direction or alternative suggestions is one of the more important decisions we're going to make. So we'd love any feedback or concerns expressed.
There's a question from Magnus about getting notified when a new version of a module I'm consuming gets published. Is there any precedent for something like that in container registries today that we can leverage?
Nothing that I know of so far. It would have to be something that we will have to we'll have to investigate that and get back to you on that one. My initial reaction is that we could potentially build something that notifies you about changes. Actually, no, never mind. There is ACR has a feature that allows you to configure webhooks. Now I just remembered at the last second. And you can actually use webhooks to notify you about artifacts being pushed.
And I think on that theme, one of the things that we do like about OCI is that all of the problems that we're going to face are problems that the larger container community is going to face. And so we take a dependency on them solving all of these problems, and they obviously have a much larger user base than we do. So even though it's a little, I guess, maybe foreign, it was foreign to me learning about this, I think hopefully what we'll find is that we get benefits of kind of like network effects of using something that a lot of other people are using.
Exactly, and for that specific problem of getting notifications, if there are existing tools that work with containers, we'll be able to reuse them for this as well.
Just to extend on this a little, just thinking about the build and release pipeline. Obviously, these are going to be things that we're going to require in our CI/CD pipelines. If we look at how we do GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps pipelines now, we use tasks. Now, this feels very much like something that would be a dependency on an additional task to be able to deploy my version of a Bicep module. Is that the kind of mechanism that you're looking to go towards with this? So
yes, like I said earlier, you will be able to, the Bicep CLI will support pushing modules to a registry directly. So you'll be able to just invoke Bicep push, and it'll compile the module and push it to whatever registry you specify. For pulling stuff down, you will actually be able to just run Bicep build if you don't have a need to separate the restore step from the build itself, and that'll pull everything that it needs. As long as the build agent is able to talk to the OCI, and as long as it has the credentials to log in to if you're pulling from a private registry. So all of that would be, I don't think we have an official Bicep task yet, but all of these actions would be possible to put in a task, just like people do with .NET or NPM or other kind of frameworks that have that basically pull content from some registry somewhere. Did I answer your question, by the way?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that we want to take right now?
Yeah, Marcin, did you cover auth-in? There was an earlier question on auth-in to private registries.
Yes, so we're still investigating the details, but currently I'm trying to make sure we use the authentication mechanisms that are built into the Azure SDKs. They're actually very powerful and can pick up basically ambient credentials from the environment, whether you're using the CLI credit, like if you logged in through CLI, if you logged in through at the PowerShell, or if you have environment variables, or if you're using an identity like a managed identity in some Azure hosted compute. Typically I expect that to just work automatically, but we're still ironing out the details of like if basically we haven't done the full enough investigation to confirm, but it looks like that's how it'll work. And we're trying very hard to make sure that it works that way. So it's as simple as possible for you to use to be able to authenticate to a private registry in a variety of scenarios.
Marcin, do you want to pull up your demo? And if there are other burning questions, we can answer them while that gets pulled up.
Yep. I was about to bring it up because we were kind of running short on time. So let's make sure we get to the demo. So here I have a VS Code running my basically a build of a language of our Bicep language server that has some of the registry capabilities kind of baked into it already. It's in a branch in the Bicep repo. If you're interested in, I can share the branch name later. It targets the module itself is going to be deployed to a subscription. It deploys a resource group. It has a badly formed attempt to deploy an app plan via module, and then it deploys a bunch of websites in a module loop here. And if you're familiar with Bicep, you've seen module references, and they typically look like a relative path to the module file. But this is not a relative path, as you might have noticed. And this is kind of what we're thinking of how the references to external modules would look like. They would typically start with they would start with a prefix that says OCI. There'll be a colon or some other separator or some other separator if we decide to change that a little bit. There'll be a URI to the registry, to the ACR itself. So I have a registry deployed. I can find my browser here. Here's my ACR that I've deployed. And let me maximize the screen here a little bit. And I've pushed out all of our examples to that registry, as well as a couple demo modules. There's a demo plan module and a demo site module. So the code that I'm showing you right now is using the demo site module, and it's linked to the v1 tag of it. In the OCI terminology, a tag is basically equivalent to a version. So this is how you reference a module, and I'm going to do the same thing here to actually finish off this reference here. So I'm going to do OCI colon, then type in the path to the module. This time I'm going to use demo plan, and now I'm going to ask you to kind of pay attention to what's happening on the screen because it'll flash very quickly once I finish the reference. Right now the reference is invalid, but the moment I type in the tag, the language server will attempt to pull the module from the registry, and then the squiggle will disappear very quickly. So I'm about to do that. V1 says the module has not been restored. The squiggly went away almost immediately. And now now the language server just treats it as a local module because it's been pulled to the local file system. I can give it a name and deploy to set the scope. And then if I'm typing in params, I get completions for the parameters just like any other local module. We finish that off. It's being validated. If I right-click build, use the JSON, and if I search for plan deploy, you can see that this has actually pulled in the contents of the module, which happens to be a Microsoft.web/server-farms resource. So this is as simple as we wanted it to be, and that's basically how the experience will work with the language server. So after this session is published online, we'll also include the deck for you to browse. And here we've got a bunch of links that cover template specs, some information about the TTK, links to quick start examples, information about Bicep, John's Bicep Learn modules, a link to our 0.4 launch call, and of course our plans for the module registry. They're captured in a GitHub issue. So feel free to take a look at those links. If you're interested in the deployment stacks private preview, please sign up and using the survey link here. We'll basically get you in as soon as we can, as soon as we're ready to add people to the private preview. Now I'm just going to open up the remainder of the time for some Q&A.
If you the chat got pretty active as it tends to. If there's something that we missed that you really want to make sure we answer right now, please just come off mute and ask.
Are we able to go over time for this, Janice, since we're the last session?
That's up to all of you. It's fine with me.
For your question, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more, but if not, I would file an issue in the Bicep repo so we can expand on that. There shouldn't be any, I can't think of any issue with nesting modules. It should work just as well as not nested modules. So if there's more that we can understand there, that would be good.
See, we have one hand up. I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm really sorry. Gajanana?
Yeah, that's fine.
Did you have a question?
I think, I read in our documentation there are limitations. Support, single line object arrays. And then other one is right, multiple lines, you cannot split it. And
yeah, so
and user defined functions. We can't use user defined functions. These are the three ones I asked actually. They said it was not answered. But have we cleared these in the limitations, or still it's there?
The new line, Bicep is new line sensitive. It's the only place where white space sensitive is for new lines. I think before the 0.1, we were like, we got to deal with this right away. Okay. And it just kept getting deprioritized. And to be frank, it hasn't emerged as like as major of an issue as we thought it was going to be. We're still open to the idea of changing that, but at least for now, we're going to leave it alone because it's not really causing any major problems. On the user-defined functions, we will get there. The reason we don't support it is because the runtime is user-defined functions as they're implemented in ARM templates leaves a little bit to be desired. So we need to kind of revisit that. But the idea of saying, hey, in this, I can define a function, maybe I can put it in a module or like a library or something like that, is very intriguing to us and opens up a lot of possibilities. So I do think we'll get there. Realistically, it'll probably be after the 1.0 that we start considering it, but you can imagine some scenarios where you develop a literal library of user-defined functions for, God knows what, naming conventions, CIDR ranges, whatever, and publishing that to the module registry as a quote-unquote library. There's really, really interesting things there. We're just not quite ready for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any last questions?
Hi everyone, this is Esther Bartel. I don't have a direct question. I just wanted to compliment the team on the fast pace of adding new features to Bicep, because that makes it very easy for us to promote and to get our customers and the engineers excited about it. So thanks for the fast pace and for the great presentations and demos.
Yeah, of course. And if I sound like a broken record when I say these sorts of things, I'm sorry, but all of it is really only possible because of folks like yourself, Esther, and all the other folks that are on this call that are evangelizing or submitting doc PRs or actual feature PRs that we're doing.
Or writing books like Frank.
Or writing books, yeah, exactly. So I think the fact that I call out Mikolai a lot, but the fact that we're able to ship major features as a community contribution is like mind-blowing to us, and that is what makes this all go that much faster, and it makes it so that the engineers, instead of responding in GitHub, because we have folks like yourself responding in GitHub, they can spend more time writing code, right? So all these things actually do contribute to our ability to go fast. So like, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you back, because I think the synergy is also because you are very responsive and very recipient of our feedback. And to be honest, that's that has not always been my experience being an MVP and trying to find the engineering teams to make sure that your feedback gets back to the product. So just wanted to say that out loud, and keep up the good work. And I'm gonna just excitedly keep evangelizing the coolness.
Cool. That's great. And really selfishly, we do that because we don't want to get yelled at in the MVP session. So there's
yeah, I guess this is more fun.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us after if we miss something or open an issue like Brian said. Great. Rickard, did you have one last one?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Esther, of course, with everything she said. I have a question regarding UI definitions and when you think they could become available with stacks and all that. You said coming so soon on the slides there.
Yeah, we're waiting on the portal team to implement their side of it, basically. So we've done the work that we need to do at the API level and PowerShell and CLI level. I think if you reach out early next week, I'll have a better ETA. We're hoping to hear something from them this week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep. All right, we're going to cap it there. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Looking forward to the next call with you all.
Thank you.